Love breaks down because people treat it as luck rather than a skill that requires knowledge, effort, and steady practice. Desire remains intense, but the work of becoming capable of love is often ignored until disappointment becomes impossible to deny. Attention shifts toward being desirable, successful, or attractive rather than building the inner power to actually love. That reversal quietly empties relationships, as admiration and excitement cannot replace maturity, discipline, humility, or courage. Another mistake occurs when people chase the right person without nurturing the faculty that makes loving possible. A third mistake comes from confusing falling in love with the durable labour of remaining deeply alive together. The initial rush feels miraculous because walls suddenly collapse, especially for isolated people hungry for nearness and relief. Yet once familiarity arrives, boredom, conflict, and disappointment expose how little real art was learned beforehand. You will see how separateness, giving, childhood patterns, society, and practice shape whether love becomes freedom or dependence. The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm can sharpen that work, so subscribe to the channel for deeper ideas that reward practice. Human life becomes challenging as self-awareness makes each person feel separate, finite, and vulnerable, often unable to return to a state of instinctive harmony. This separateness generates anxiety, shame, and guilt, as isolation makes existence feel like an unbearable inner prison. The pressure to escape this prison is so intense that nearly every culture invents ways to dissolve aloneness. Some methods are ecstatic and temporary, using trance, ritual, intoxication, or loveless orgasm to interrupt the pain. These states feel powerful because they flood the body and mind, briefly erasing the distance between self and world. But the relief is fleeting, which means anxiety rises again, demanding stronger repetition or deeper surrender. Another path is herd conformity, where safety is purchased by becoming similar enough to disappear into the group. This solution seems calmer and more permanent, yet it often leaves a person standardized, routinized, and quietly untouched. Creative work offers fuller contact with the world, but even productive work cannot replace the need for interpersonal union. Love matters because it answers separateness without destroying individuality, while false unions either fade or erase the person. Not every fusion deserves the name love, as some forms remove loneliness by sacrificing independence and integrity. Symbiotic attachment can appear passive through submission or active through domination, yet both depend on an unequal merger. Submission promises protection, certainty, and relief from decision-making, but the cost is becoming just a fragment of another. Domination seems strong, yet it relies just as deeply on the dependent person who confirms its inflated power. Both paths avoid the risk of freedom, as neither partner stands fully alive, separate, and responsible. Mature love joins two people while preserving the fact that each remains a whole person. It is active rather than merely emotional, using human powers instead of collapsing under compulsion or neediness. This makes love less like falling and more like standing, less like possession and more like shared aliveness. The paradox is demanding but beautiful, as two people can become one without ceasing to remain two. That form of union removes isolation without devouring the self, which is why it becomes the mature answer. Love becomes visible first through giving, but giving here means expressing vitality rather than surrendering value or dignity. A non-productive person experiences giving as loss, sacrifice, or cheating, because inner poverty makes generosity feel dangerous. A productive person feels giving as strength, joy, potency, and the overflow of life moving outward. What is given most deeply is not property, but aliveness itself through joy, understanding, humour, sadness, attention, and presence. Real giving creates more life in both people, because what awakens in the other returns and enlarges the giver. That is why love contains care, an active concern for the life and growth of what is loved. It also contains responsibility, not as imposed duty, but as readiness to answer another person's expressed or hidden needs. Respect protects love from turning possessive, because it wants the other person to unfold for their own sake. Knowledge completes the pattern, since care and respect become blind without seeing another person beneath surface emotion. When these elements work together, love stops being appetite and becomes a disciplined way of helping life grow. Early life begins in near fusion, where warmth, feeding, and safety are not yet separated from the person providing them. At first, the child mainly experiences unconditional love, which feels peaceful and impossible to produce directly. Later, a new joy emerges as the child starts giving, creating, and loving, rather than only receiving reassurance. This shift matters because mature love grows when loving becomes more important than securing proof of being lovable. Mother and father answer different needs, and these patterns shape the child's later relations to authority and intimacy. Mother represents home, protection, and unconditional care, with the wish that the child grows secure enough to separate. Father represents guidance, law, discipline, and direction, with the challenge of entering the wider world with competence. Motherly love turns difficult precisely when growth requires letting go, because real care must support independence rather than helplessness. Fatherly love turns healthy when authority becomes patient guidance that eventually teaches a child to become self-directed. If these patterns help you read your own relationships more honestly, subscribe to the channel, because this kind of clarity changes daily love. Brotherly love is foundational, expressing care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge toward all human beings equally. It extends beyond personal favourites, reaching out to everyone who shares human vulnerability. Motherly love is distinct, serving the helpless and fostering growth rather than permanent dependence. Its greatest challenge comes when the child becomes independent, as giving everything must no longer include ownership or control. Erotic love seeks complete union with one person, making it exclusive and vulnerable to illusion. It becomes genuine only when partners love from the centre of their being, rather than from panic or scarcity. Self-love is not the enemy of love for others, as a human being cannot be excluded from humanity. Caring for one's own life, growth, and freedom is part of the same productive orientation that enables caring for others. Selfishness is not self-love, but often a symptom of inner emptiness, insecurity, and an inability to love. These forms of love differ in their objects and shapes, yet each is false when growth, freedom, and respect are absent. Love directed toward God mirrors the same emotional structures that shape human love, especially the lingering forms of parental attachment. Mother-centered religion highlights unconditional shelter, rescue, forgiveness, and trust in a love that cannot be earned. Father-centered religion emphasizes justice, obedience, law, guidance, reward, punishment, and conditional recognition through conduct. These religious forms matter because they reveal whether a person still seeks protection or has grown toward inner maturity. Development progresses from dependence on external authority toward a deeper relation where justice, truth, and love become inward principles. At that point, God becomes less like a ruler with preferences and more like a symbol of living unity. Mature religious love cannot be separated from love for people, as emotional development remains one continuous structure. Someone trapped in infantile dependence on authority will likely reproduce that dependence in religion as well. Someone who grows beyond possession and fear can move toward a more symbolic, inward, and universal spiritual love. The measure of that maturity is not pious language, but whether love becomes freer, less possessive, and more humane. The surrounding culture weakens love by teaching people to value exchange, packaging, and saleable personality traits, rather than genuine connections. People start meeting each other as commodities, hoping to secure the best bargain based on their exchange value. This habit encourages relationships built on appeal, status, and mutual usefulness, rather than on the depth of character. Even the concept of equality becomes distorted, as sameness and standardization quietly replace individuality, polarity, and living differences. Work and leisure are both routinized, leaving people efficient, entertained, and socially adjusted while feeling inwardly starved. Under these conditions, love often decays into mutual sexual technique, collaborative comfort, or a small alliance against loneliness. Such arrangements may look normal, but they remain forms of pseudo-love because they avoid true encounter. The result is a socially approved pathology, where intimacy becomes teamwork, and passion becomes consumption with emotional decoration. Public conformity also keeps fear hidden, as people mistake shared opinion for independent thought and belonging for freedom. A culture organized this way can talk endlessly about love while making the mature capacity for love increasingly rare. No art is mastered directly, as the individual must first become a fitting instrument before skilled action becomes natural. Loving requires discipline, concentration, patience, and serious concern. which must be carried through the entirety of ordinary life. Discipline here is not about following rigid rules, but about choosing a structure that gradually becomes pleasant as it serves aliveness. Regular waking, reading, walking, reflection, and restraint build an inner order that opposes careless indulgence and distraction. Concentration proves challenging because modern culture trains scattered attention, constant stimulation, and fear of being alone with oneself. Learning to sit quietly without consumption or noise reveals how restless and defended the mind usually remains. Yet, that solitude matters, as attachment born from an inability to stand alone becomes dependence rather than love. Patience is also crucial, since every art matures slowly and collapses when people demand quick results or permanent excitement. Faith gives the practice its depth, as love asks for commitment without guarantees and courage without control. The work becomes possible only when daily habits stop protecting fear and start training presence, steadiness, and inward freedom. Loving begins where control loosens, for no genuine union can be guaranteed by strategy, demand, or emotional insurance. Faith is necessary precisely because another person can never be possessed, predicted, or forced into reciprocal aliveness. Courage is not swagger or recklessness, but the willingness to risk pain and disappointment for values deemed ultimate. This risk appears in ordinary acts such as trusting judgment, beginning work, raising children, and staying close without domination. Real practice starts small, by noticing where fear disguises itself as cynicism, self-protection, calculation, or moral superiority. It also begins by recognizing how often the deeper fear is not rejection, but the danger of loving fully. To love means giving oneself without guarantee, in hope that love will awaken love in the other person. That hope is never secured by power, for power and rational faith move in opposite directions. What changes then is not that uncertainty disappears, but that a person becomes more alive within uncertainty. If you want more ideas to turn fear into practice, subscribe to the channel, for loving well requires repeated courage.